Jessica, lots of questions, but with limited time, let me throw this one at you. We're talking about rounding up criminal elements, right? That's the initial focus of any deportation action for the incoming administration, right? Focus on those criminals who are in the country illegally. And you would think reasonable people on both sides of the political spectrum could say, okay, well, that makes sense. Here's a question: if you're talking about a Venezuelan, a TDA member, or you're talking about someone from China who's committed a crime, you're talking about someone from Haiti. I'm not picking on these countries. I'm bringing them up for a particular reason. They're not going to take those people back, right? It's just we don't have the relationship. In the case of Haiti, they don't have the infrastructure. They're in chaos. The Chinese regime is certainly not going to cooperate with the incoming administration on deportation issues. That's, I think, a bridge too far for them. So what happens? What's the technical process for individuals who should be in that first round of deportation, but where do they go?
That's a really good question. And this is an issue that's going to be a problem, especially initially. Each one of these countries, and we call them recalcitrant countries, the countries that won't take their citizens back for deportation. And a lot of times it's criminals that we're talking about. It's going to take an individual approach for each country. There's a role for diplomacy. There's a role for carrots and sticks. With the case of Venezuela, we have no relationship with Venezuela right now. But we need to remember also that a lot of the Venezuelans who came here and took advantage of the catch and release policies at the border were living in other countries before they came here. They were firmly settled with jobs and permission to stay in these countries. And I think we are going to have to try to work with some of those countries to take them back. Maybe not in the case of, gang members like TDA or hardened criminals, but other people who were doing fine in Chile or Peru or Argentina and now are going to lose their work permit. With the criminals, it's going to take a tougher approach with Venezuela, but there's a tool in the law that allows our government through the State Department to impose a visa ban on countries or groups of people within countries as a sanction to try to get them to relent in their stance of not taking someone back. So you could go to a country like Venezuela or China and say, look, we're not going to issue visas to your diplomats, or we're not going to issue visas to your kids of government officials who want to come to school in the United States, or to the wives of government officials who want to go visit Vegas, or these people who want to go to Disney World. Those visas simply are going to be cut off until you start living up to your international responsibilities and take your citizens back. And this has been successful times in the past when it has been applied. Again, it depends on the country. A country like Haiti, right, that's a tough situation. We may have to work with third countries on the Haitians, but there are tools that we have at our disposal. Maybe we use carrots instead of sticks, offer aid, offer something that those countries want. But we do have leverage and tools available to us. The problem is they've never been used by the federal, I shouldn't say never. They were never used under Biden, but they haven't been used as much as we should be using them to lean on these countries. So we just, they can't just dump all of their criminals and dissidents and everything else on our doorstep.
Yeah, it's, I think just listening to that, it makes sense. I understand what you're saying. It's the complexity of it. And it tends to, things like this tend to happen in sound bites, right? Everybody just busy. You're trying to put food on the table. You got a million things going on. And so, most people hear sort of a top line issue, a headline, right? We're going to do this. And, but when you start really examining it and you understand the complexity of it, right? That's why I think it's important for whoever's running communications for the incoming administration to make sure they understand the importance of messaging this as they go along. We can't just be saying, okay, we're sending everybody home. I mean, that's,
Right. The
because you're setting yourself
groundwork
up for
has to be
failure.
laid through a public relations campaign for how this is going to be messaged and make sure people understand why it needs to happen.
And that will also, I think, that will also help in terms of slowing, or changing behavior of folks who may be thinking, yeah, I'm just going to cross the border, right? Because the more they see this, right, and then more they understand it, that to your point earlier in the conversation, right, just a little bit of messaging could have a really consequential change on behavior, on attitude, and that could include the numbers that we see coming across the border. Now, obviously, that's an element of enforcement and adjusting things, but I think we don't want to underestimate that. I don't want to keep beating that dead horse, but let's talk about, if we could, in the time that we've got, sanctuary cities. What do you make of sort of this? Over the past week in particular, there's been a rush to the microphone from Democrat leaders of sanctuary cities around the country, talking about how they'll do everything in their power to not help or to hinder, as a matter of. So, what do you make of this?
Well, this also could be a big problem for the Trump administration because, as we saw in the first Trump term, the sanctuary jurisdictions became very, very recalcitrant and obstructive, and painted this narrative of an overzealous immigration enforcement. And so they started passing laws that forbid local law enforcement agencies to cooperate with ICE. And what that does is it necessarily means that the criminals that ICE is trying to get for removal are going to be released back to the streets, and they end up committing more crimes. There's a couple ways to address it. I think one way is what has been tried, and that is to, since most of these sanctuary policies are in place for political reasons, they're not going to change. They think they get a benefit from that, even though it's a problem for public safety. So what you have to do is either start withholding certain federal funds from these jurisdictions that don't cooperate, certain federal law enforcement grant programs. You just have to say, look, if you're going to block our federal agents from getting custody of criminal aliens directly from the jails, then you're just not going to have access to grants for certain law enforcement agencies in your state or in your city. And that did work to change certain jurisdictions. Like, for example, Miami-Dade County in Florida said, well, we don't want to lose that money, so we're going to start cooperating with ICE again. So there will be some that come around like that. With others, you may have to file lawsuits. I think in other places, a public relations campaign on the part of ICE by saying, look, this week, the New York City Police Department released these criminals who we were trying to deport. And if they commit a crime, now you know why. It's because your own police department released them. And I think that kind of public attention to what's really going on could work really well for ICE. Another thing Congress could do is give a private right of action for victims of these crimes, if they're serious, to potentially hold the local sanctuary government liable for any problems that are caused when they deliberately release somebody that ICE was trying to take into custody for removal. That's the kind of thing that really gets their attention.